Hello there everybody and welcome to a new video for Age of Wonders 4. In this one I got a new build out of the opposites category. We're playing a nature shadow build. So in its core it's an ice animal summoner build played with the high culture. I really enjoy this one because you are out with a big swarm of animals, you have a solid economy with all that ice going on, you are really good at getting large armies going, and you have a ton of support on the back of that. So let's get started as usual with the cultural setup, and then we go over the tomes. Then I go over your military options and then a bit of strategy talk. So starting out with the culture. So here, well, we're going for a little bit of a weird one. The only thing that I'm absolutely convinced of being super powerful are the powerful evokers, because we end up with a lot of battle mages and supporters, and combat casting points are outright amazing. The more, the better, especially when we're playing high culture. Adept settlers, well, I mostly picked that because I wanted to have a nature cultural trait, but after playing these guys for a while, I have to agree with myself that, well, traits that would reduce summoned units upkeep costs are really good, or generally upkeep cost reductionary skills are pretty good, or you just stick with the adept settlers because it's just an amazing trait in every aspect. So on the body traits, well, here I went a little bit wild too. I went for unicorn mounts because I think they are really good on the tier 3 units of your culture. Not only can they blink away, they also get all the advantages from your nature spells that synergize with animals. So your most powerful battle mages get the most out of your bonuses, so that's pretty synergistic. But you could also swap out the unicorns for spiders, very well suitable. Don't go for wolves though, their pack hunter ability only affects you if you're doing melee, and the awakeners are ranged units, so that wouldn't work too well. Or you just go for any of the other body traits that seem fit to you. I just felt like unicorn riding ice druids sounded like a great idea, and actually it's quite synergistic due to the fact that you can save your awakeners from any form of pressure they end up in. So that being said, you have a lot of flexibility with this build. I would only say keep the Arctic adaptation online, because when you're playing an ice build, it's really good to have a lot of icy provinces around you right from the get-go, and that trait guarantees that. More about that later. Now we will dive into the tomes. So I like to start out with this tome, not with this build, with the Tome of Beasts before going into Cryomancy. Tome of Beasts gives you the supply of throwaway units that the high culture likes in the early game. Summon Wild Animal and the Wild Speaker give you plenty of material to work with, and you don't have to worry about losses anymore once you have these two spells going. Animal Kinship gives your units that are mounted a nice trait with animals, or basically, no, your units get a bonus when they're next to animals or cavalry, so your tier 3 units will buff the rest of your army as well, and the bonuses are quite substantial. Don't underestimate crit chance. Marcus Prey and Call of the Wild round out your combat spell repertoire. Call of the Wild is really amazing because it gives all your units a quite nice buff, and it's super cheap. Don't forget to pick a pack leader at some point, because flanker and critical hit chance are again two things that you love to have, and overall support skills are quite powerful with the nature build. Wildlife Sanctuary is something if you don't want to summon your animals and instead hire them at your city. Tome of Cryomancy is the next thing to pick up. It opens up a lot of options for you. Ice Coffin and the White Witch give you access to freezing, which is really nice as a strategical resource, because now you're capable of halting single units that would pressure you too hard or anything like that. You also have access to a skirmisher unit that you can summon at your will, and it really pays off to keep it alive, because you can get a tier 3 unit out of that. You get access to some unit enchantments. Frost arrows and frost blades are pretty cool because they are super powerful against slowed units. Blizzard is a nice extra power-up for map spells. If you want to lower the enemy status resistance, this thing is really useful. The nice thing here is the School of Cryomancy, giving you some extra mana for snow and ice provinces, and your main city can already benefit that until you have later access to more ice provinces. Tier 2 is starting out for me always with the Tome of Fertility, and this is because Animate Flora gives you another throwaway unit in the battlefield. You can just turn Flora obstacles into a skirmishy unit that is fairly resilient. Quite nice stuff. The Nymph is just an amazing supporter. Revitalize is a powerful regenerative thing, also negative status purger as an AoE, quite rare these things. And also Seduction, well, turncoating enemy units is always a nice thing. It's only 60% chance, but if it hits, it does make a big difference. You also gain access to Blossom of Life, and I want to point out that the spell is amazingly powerful. It's super big, 2 hex radius, and 3 regeneration is 18 HP for 3 turns. So this spell heals 55 HP on a 2 hex radius. This is so insanely much HP if you happen to aim it luckily. The only downside, like all regeneration effects, it's time delayed, so you have to keep your dudes a little bit safe. But in a nutshell, this spell allows you to have a beat-up army. You just smack it on them at the beginning of the fight, and they will heal up over the course of the battle. No biggie. Restore the Lands is absolutely useless for you because you want to have icy provinces, so just forget about that. Temple of Fertility, yeah, I like that one. It's just freebies for population, never something bad about that. And farms give you suddenly more draft and extra food with that, so this build, as you might already notice, is really good at grabbing provinces at this point. The next tome is the Tome of the Doom Herald, which is surprisingly effective because Joy Siphoners is really cool because, you know, grinds away the enemy's morale and boosts up your own, while Cause Despair and Cruel Weaponry give you synergies when the enemies are starting to grow low in morale. So basically, once you start winning, you win harder and harder, and also Cause Despair gives you the ability to just force the enemy to receive 30% extra damage. Cruel Weaponry is surprisingly powerful, don't underestimate it. And Prelude of Doom, if you have the ability to prepare, yeah, you can also shave off the enemy's morale right from the get-go. The Banshee is something I don't use too often, but if you have the mana to spend, it's a pretty amazing unit because you can just lower the enemy's morale even further. But this is not the major concept of this build, so most of the time I just take those other spells, these 3 here, and ignore mostly about the Banshee. The Doom Depth Trench is a nice little add-on because, you know, it invites you to play evil. City stability is no big concern for this build at all, and the income bonuses are really nice. So when we hit tier 3, we get access to the Tome of Vigor, and I personally recommend you to pick that one up first if you are in military pressure, when you want to conquer and steamroll the enemy. This is the book to go. And if you happen to be in peace times, you can also start out with the Cold Dark. But let's talk about this one first. Summon Greater Animal is the bread and butter summoning spell in the mid and late game. It cranks out tier 3 and tier 4 units at a really reliable pace, because if there's no tier 3 unit in that can spawn on the target location, you get a tier 4 instead. And the icy provinces spawn ice spiders that are tier 4 by nature, so you have really good access to tier 4 units. Totem of the Wild is also giving you the ability to spawn units like crazy. You summon that thing and you just crank out units permanently. You can have up to 5 summons out of that thing, and you can summon even several of those, so yeah, throwaway units are no longer a matter of availability only. You have to place them strategically. At that point, I feel always unbeatable whenever I play this build. Unleash Beast gives you a nice little additional Berserkitis for your summons. And, you know, this is really amazing because you have so many summoned units that you don't care about. Just post them at the front of the enemy army and just slap that on them and watch them go crazy. It's amazing how much effect that can do. Empowered Beasts cranks up the power of all your animals. Not much to say about that, except for they even get to destroy buildings. I really like that one. And Super Growth is something for the rest of your culture, giving you more beef for your mana So you're getting harder and harder to kill with these things. And Animal Handler, mind control, immunity, and magic resistance for your animals and your cavalry units. You see, your tier 3 mages become super powerful with this build due to the mount trait. So yeah, I like this one. And once we go over to the next one, we go to the Tome of the Cold Dark. The most appealing spells in here for me are first Frostling Transformation, so we have only benefits when we're on cold terrain, and they are pretty massive. On top of that, we also gain the immunity to be frozen. I love this one because frozen is a pretty common hard CC, and you're all of a sudden totally immune against that. And after that, marching winter, and then you slap that on all of your cities, and then you see you get food and production income bonuses, and the worst or best part about it is only you benefit from it or other rulers that happen to have that book. But apart from that, it's a slap in the face for every enemy because you all of a sudden grow super powerful out of that because you already have the School of Cryomancy. You now gain Frost Spire, which gives you more knowledge for snow and ice provinces, and this is where everything grows bonkers, basically. The snow spirits, you can now summon them directly. They are a super good source of hard CC, and they are really good throwaway units as well. Flash freeze allows you to pull off your stuns on enemy terrain as well and annoy them to death with more arctic terrain. And Veil of Darkness is somehow not useful at all. I really hope that this spell gets overworked at some point because no, didn't like it. So tier 4, well, Tome of Paradise is where things are pretty much done for your build, but I'm going to go for deeper, of course. But yeah, exhilarating pollen, morale bonus for your entire army, very synergistic actually with the Doom Heralds, Joy Siphoners, because you end up with very high morale stats very quickly with that one. Gaia's Chosen, the major race transformation, making you super beefy. Charge resistance is amazing, status resistance, and 20 HP. Well, only things you'd like about that. Blessing of Paradise is so good for the high culture again because you tend to have a nice city stability already. And yeah, 40 city stability on a city spell is just stupidly powerful. Enchanted Bloom gives you, well, nothing in particular. You can totally skip that one because it's grasslands interaction. Since we're ice mages, I wouldn't recommend it. Nature's Bounty is really cool because, you can just crank up your unit's power with that for one very important battle. So if you have the mana to spend, it's really cool. And the Fortress of Vines, well, I find it quite situational. I don't use it too much, and it's a pretty good spot to just skip if you don't want to research too much out of the high tiers. Garden of Bliss is one thing that I want to point my finger at as well, because you end up with stupidly much food with that build. This converts food into mana, and at some point you will notice that mana is something you can't get enough of in this build, actually, because you have so many things that you want to do with it. And don't forget about Inspiring Icon. If you go for the support path, which is pretty synergistic when you go so hard into nature, you can also have stability bonus for your city, and you have the Blessing of Paradise, so this one's really powerful. It's an interesting one because not many traits interact with cities and battlefield. Okay, so when you want to go for your second tier 4 tome, you could go for the other tier 4 nature, but I didn't find that too synergistic. Tome of Oblivion is amazingly interesting for this build, and we have access to it, so why not use it? So if you still have mana available, you can use Summon Living Fog as a source of insanity that's hard to beat, and it's another neat little throwaway unit that you can muster. But for me personally, Ritual of Somnia is really, really amazing as it stuns the enemy's army right from the get-go, which shatters the already lousy organization of the AI and its armies right from the get-go. Book of Insanity is super good if you want to defend your cities, a 10% chance that the enemy will go insane every turn, and it's inside any domain of your city. So this spell alone is worth the book, because if you're aiming for a defensive victory, this thing is insane. The enemy will have a lot of disables on them every fight that you've defend your premises. And Sleep of Oblivion is another thing that's just stupidly powerful because you can't just outright kill a unit and end a battle prematurely or whatever you want to do. I mean, they come back after 2 turns and insane and obviously lost 25% of their HP, but this is a tricky spell that you can do some shenanigans with. So this one I personally like as well. If you have a hero that is actually attacking up to 3 times per turn, Mind Crush can be really, really powerful, but you need an orb for that. So, but if you happen to have it, it's really, really powerful for your ranged attacks because its sanity is stupidly crippling. And as the last tome to pick up, Goddess of Nature, obviously, because buffing up our entire army and resurrecting all our animals with on the battlefield, yes please. Force of Nature, buffing up all our plants and cavalry units again, yes please. And, well, Forest Awareness is a little bit of a weird one, but I guess it doesn't hurt too much. So Avatar of Nature makes your hero stupidly powerful, and that's where we end the tome section. So when we go over the military roster, this build is a little bit odd. So, in the early stages of the game, you will utilize Dusk Hunters and Dawn Defenders and a bit of Sun Priests, as you can muster them as early as possible to support your army. And as soon as you have access to summon Wild Animal and the Wild Speaker, you can divert your entire losses on animals. Ideally, you try to play around in combat early game to summon animals via the Wild Speakers, get up 2 of them or even 3 if you'd like to, and those summoned animals are the stuff you play around and you try to keep the losses as low as possible on your native units. Once you have reached yourself into tier 2 roster, things get a lot easier as the Sun Priests can heal up your units. Dusk Hunters, by the way, are really good for the early game's damage because the bows are just powerful. You have Awakening, you have Ice Arrows at some point, therefore you can crank out a lot of damage. As soon as you have access to the White Witches, you should really get them going because they have only moderate damage, but 1 or 2 of these in my banners, I always enjoy them because of their fling of frozen that is very available, and 90% freezing chance is super powerful in the mid and early game because you just can control the enemy's movement so well with that. And as soon as you have the Awakeners available, go for them because they have an AoE nuke, which is really good, and like I said already, due to their synergy with the unicorns, they can do amazing things for your armies. And really don't need much more than these. Actually, I was able to steamroll a lot of the enemy with just summoning wild animals and the native roster. And as soon as I was able to summon nymphs and greater animals, well, you don't need to do much anymore because a lot of this build is about just summoning units and playing around them, and that's really fun to do. I just want to point out here when we're starting to go now into the strategy part, it's a little bit of both, that's why I'm picking it up here. Unleash the Beast is something you should totally aim at your animals, and this is also one reason why Wild Speakers are always good in your roster. Killing Momentum gives you the ability to attack just another time with your animals, and packing that on the Shock Trooper ones is, in my opinion, the most effective way to utilize this skill. Now, strategy-wise, you can do a lot with this build. You have access to Shadow Affinity, so you profit a lot from Warfare quite early on, because knowledge gained from heroes is stupidly good. This is just one good reason to be in war with free cities, AI players, or whatever. You also have a good reason to utilize your Whispering Stones, because they give you knowledge, and with the nature traits you have access to a wonderful array of things like the Spirit Wolf thing here, right, of the Guardian Spirit. This is really good because this is another throwaway unit that's more powerful than the others. And yeah, Wild Expansion. Right now, it is even more broken than it will be later. Right now, you can acquire even tier 3 and tier 4 units by that. This will get soon nerfed. Then it will be only tier 1 or tier 2 units that you can get when you're annexing new provinces. But Yeah, you like to have a large army, so this one is really, really good. And Rite of Awakening gives you a nice little knowledge steroid for the later stages of the game. And Druidic Care, I want to point out because this build is insanely mana hungry. You want to summon units and you want to cast spells a lot. Therefore, I really ended up utilizing mana much, much more than with most builds. So these things are quite handy. And at the same time, with the Shadow Affinities, you can go for Magic Origin Upkeep Reduction, which is very, very good for this build. And yeah, more warfare traits that are actually really, really good for you. So all in all, when you're starting out with this build, try to conquer your turf as fast as possible, as usual, and try to gather as much mana and knowledge as fast as possible, because these things are really, really important for you. You can play very nicely expansionistic with this build, so crank out your cities as quick as you can, because, you know, when you're starting out with Adept Settlers, you're settling down super fast, and you can do quite a lot with that. Another thing that you can do with this build pretty exclusively is to utilize cities bit of a as a bit of a warfare thing, because if you now just would slap down a city here and build it up and then bring up the icy terrain spell, you all of a sudden would flood the enemy terrain with icy stuff, and that is good for you and usually bad for the enemy. So this is one pretty unique move about ice builds. Another thing that I want to talk about here is the School of Cryomancy and the Frost Spire. I already mentioned it, but the Cryomancy School, don't forget to set up one early on near your main city, because the extra mana and the extra things here are really good, and the extra conduits and research posts these upgrades are counting into are very, very good for the high culture, because you happen to have access to the solar nexus that gives you even more city stability when you have these buildings in masses. So what I want to point out with that, this build is extremely good at maintaining high city stabilities, which makes your cities stupidly productive at some point. So early on, it might happen to you that you struggle with gold and such things, but at the tier 3 point, basically, or tier 3 tome discovery point, this build basically explodes. So my suggestion here is try to play this baby so as aggressive as you can, because the benefit from killing heroes with every shadow build is just amazing, and don't give up on that advantage while you have it. And obviously, one other point that I want to talk about here, since we are playing high culture, we have a natural order affinity, which is outright amazing. So we can vassalize cities pretty decently with that. We gain access to all these wonderful things. We gain access to extra whispering stones. So we're really powerful in that department. And you also gain a nice array of other extras for vassalized cities. So this is some side branch that this build has without lifting a finger. So my personal favorites is therefore doing things like downstairs here, just vassalizing cities down there and keeping them in my possession after waging war with them. As you can see here, you get a nice income out of that, and at some point with the shadow things here, you can also gain mana and knowledge about out of that. So in a nutshell, this build is really well suited to have lots of doom stacks rolling over the map and conquering cities. So if you want to do a lot of warfare, this build is really well suited for you. And it's surprisingly good. And even though nature and shadow are not working well together per lore, this build is pretty nice. And what I personally like the most is that you have access to all these icy units, you know. And banner-wise, well, I already talked about it a bit. So I do a lot with heroes. I add in a lot of animals and supporters. The late game armies of mine look like that all over the board. As many animals and supporters as possible, and a couple of heroes mixed in between. Here's the last banner. I just waged some war. That's where all my tier 3 battle mages went, but yeah. All in all, it's very simple. Just add in like 50% animals, 25% supporters, 25% battle mages, and you're pretty well fit to go. And the rest is just well adapted to your own experiences while playing through with this build. I really enjoyed this one a lot because it is amazingly powerful, and I love turning the entire world to ice. It's just such a fun thing to do. All right. So thanks for watching, everybody. Let me know what you thought. Let me know in the comment section what kind of builds you'd like to see as well. I'm doing right now a little bit of an opposite series, so Astral Materium is the next thing that I'm ought to do, but I'm all ears about what kind of builds you'd like to see. So leave a thumbs up or a subscription if you like the video. Consider not consider subscribing. Consider the playlist. I'm stumbling over my words today. There's a playlist link down there. Check it out, and you will find all the other Age of Wonders videos I did. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching this video again, and see you soon.